Colnago recently invited me to the launch of the C64, the brand's brand new top-end race bike. The new C64, which if you're to believe this handout that's been helpfully prepared by Colnago, is the fruit of more than 2 years of research, yet it was designed based on an almost immeasurable history of cycling, innovation and success, one which began in 1954, which if your mental maths is good, you'll realise was 64 years ago, hence the name of the bike. In the C64's design lies Ernesto Colnago's knowledge and experience gained from a lifelong pursuit of cycling perfection. And joining us on the launch was Ernesto himself, and it was a real treat to be able to speak to the enthusiastic 86-year-old about his new bike. One of the highlights of the trip, alongside riding the bike, had to be him retelling us the stories about his first tour that he ever did. And despite his age, he was still jumping around and very excited to be there with us all. Colnago has started doing monocoque frames, best example being the V2R that my colleague Matthew saw last year. They still stick with the lugged construction, claiming that it offers certain superior characteristics over a monocoque design, and as with Colnago's older bikes, you can still customise geometry and fit with the C64. During the presentation for the bike, we were handed around different components from the frame, such as the tubes and the lugs, and we get this a lot at different launches, and you never tend to see anything that particularly interesting, but these Colnago lugs, I cannot deny the inside of them is just beautifully finished. They're impeccably well made, and I can see why Colnago want to show them off. The changes from the C60 to the C64 are not that drastic. For the most part, it relates to different tube profiles, but the most drastic change is probably around the seat tube junction, where now the seat stays meet in one kind of monostay design, and the seat tube and seat cluster are molded as one individual part. The bike is available in 14 different sizes, and this is quite impressive because it means that this one piece seat tube, including the seat cluster, has to be made in 14 different sizes, which unsurprisingly probably adds to the overall rather lofty expense of the frame, with the frame set coming in at €4,500 as pictured. Possibly in an attempt just to upset every single mechanic out there, Colnago have really pushed the boat out when it comes to bottom bracket standards, designing their own completely proprietary one-off one for the C64. Thread fit 82.5 looks awfully similar to T47, which debuted a few years ago, but it's just subtly different enough to make sure that nothing that's designed for the T47 standard will actually work for the Colnago one. I'm not certain whether or not this will require its own proprietary tools, but it is good to know that it will work with pretty much any crankset out there. The good news is it was developed with ceramic speed, so it probably means it's going to be quite good, but it definitely means it's going to be very expensive. It'll come as absolutely no surprise, but the bike is also available in a disc build, though we were riding the rim brake version of the bike, which I was delighted to see has moved to direct mount brakes. The move to direct mount brakes means that the rim brake version of the bike will take 28mm tyres, and the disc one will take very slightly wider. This is quite surprising for Colnago, which is a brand which typically hasn't had particularly generous clearances. Colnago was also showing off a prototype of a very cool alloy stem which completely and utterly integrates hydraulic hoses through the bars, into the stem, all the way through the steerer, eventually exiting at the bottom of the fork. So the cockpit of the bike looks super clean for a disc road bike. This won't be available at launch, but it is expected to ship in May. I had the chance to ride the bike in Lanzarote, which if you're not familiar with that part of the world is a very rolling, very volcanic looking island, but more than anything, it's incredibly windy. The rolling route took us over about 2,000 metres of climbing over the course of a 100-kilometre ride. There was more than enough time to get some early opinions on the bike, and as you would expect of a very expensive, lugged carbon Colnago, it was very good. One of the things that Colnago was very keen to talk about during the presentation was its micro suspension, shock-absorbing headset. Now, much to my surprise, the roads were, pretty much smooth for the most part in Lanzarote, but we did have a few very rough sections. Did I feel the effects of the micro suspension headset? Absolutely not. I don't believe it for a minute. I don't believe that it could deform to any kind of realistic degree, and the 25mm Vittoria tubs probably had more to do with the smooth ride than anything else. One thing that did seriously impress me was the direct mount campy brakes. Campy brakes are already known for being super strong, but when coupled with the direct mounting, they were just insanely good. I have a feeling this had something to do with the 3 Diamante braking surface on the Campag wheels, which were also fitted, and probably a lot to do with the bone dry conditions. but the power of these brakes was honestly best in class and without doubt the best rim braking I've ever experienced. The build my bike came with was completely flawless. I mean, it'd be very hard to critique Super Record, the £1,600 group set, but things like the finishing kit as well were also suitably racy for such a high-end frame, and the Data Superleggera kit was just absolutely excellent. It's incredibly stiff, it's very light, and is a good fit for this bike. While we did have a chance to gas up a few climbs, the wind did its absolute best to ensure I went as slow as possible, but regardless, the bike was incredibly stiff and it felt great on the climbs. Despite having a very racy geometry, the bike also felt super confident on the descents, which did surprise me, but I think that's probably in part to do with the very, very powerful direct mount brakes. The bike isn't really built with aero qualities in mind, but with that said, I appreciated the racy position, which allowed me to get aero so I could duck behind all the journalists that were with me on the launch and avoid being caught up in the wind. Given I was riding in bone dry conditions on almost perfect roads in a wonderful sunny country, it's very hard to draw any real conclusions about the bike, and I'd much prefer to take it back to my own patch and on familiar roads to give you any kind of conclusion about the bike. With that said, I'm not personally one to buy into the idea of brand loyalty or heritage, but if you're the sort of person that won't ride anything but a Colnago, I have absolutely no doubt that you will enjoy this bike. It's exactly what you expect of a Colnago. It's still lugged carbon, it's still very stiff, it's still very light, and it's quite unremarkable, but also quietly brilliant at the same time.